Hello my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/ProRevenge, where people get back at others who've messed with them and lives are getting ruined. And in this episode, it's all about nasty Karen teachers messing with the wrong students, guys, and it doesn't end well. So if you've ever dealt with a nasty teacher, this one's for you. I hope you enjoy the stories. Hit subscribe if you're not subscribed, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So my best friend, who we'll call Kay, is a first grade teacher, and as soon as she told me this story, I knew I had to share it. 2 years ago, Kay had a student named Xavier. He was a sweet 6-year-old boy when things were good, but his parents had just gotten divorced. His mom wasn't that great even before she was out of the picture, and his dad was quite disengaged from both his son's behavior and his son's education. Rather understandably, Xavier acted out in class. He'd refuse to listen to Kay. He would push kids and disrupt class in more ways than I could possibly list. Now, Kay worked hard with Xavier to improve his behavior and get his dad more involved in a positive way. She would often call me and talk about it to decompress because that's what friends were for. But occasionally, Xavier went too far and did something she just couldn't deal with in class. For example, one day, Xavier tried to stab another student in the hand with a sharpened pencil. On those occasions, she would write him up and send him to the vice principal. But here's the thing. The vice principal was absolutely no help whatsoever. He would joke around with Xavier and refuse to address the problem that Kay sent Xavier there for. He would give him candy and then lecture Kay for writing up a 6-year-old for any reason because it reflected badly on him. Now, I'm sure this has to do with the BS known as merit pay, but whatever. Unfortunately, his actions made it significantly harder for Kay to help Xavier. To top it all off, Kay figured out after a few referrals that the vice principal logged into the system and erased each of Xavier's referrals, thus erasing all evidence of Xavier's pattern of behavior. In a word, this is bad. Now, I know nothing about education, but damn well know that much. My brother was a holy terror in elementary school, and he got in so much trouble from the 3rd to 6th grades that both the principal and vice principal were on a first-name basis with my mom. Those records sure didn't disappear, not into the shredder, and certainly not into the digital ether. She reported this to her higher-ups, who weren't the vice principal, but they both told him about the complaint and specified that Kay was the one making the complaint. The vice principal was cold and rude to her after that. Nothing was ever done about it because it seemed to be a one-time thing. But now, Kay knew what to do. Every time she had to write Xavier up again, she meticulously documented everything herself. She sent herself all the relevant stuff and saved the emails, the whole shebang. By the end of the year, Xavier's behavior had greatly improved, thanks to her mentoring and the various ways she learned how to engage with him in the classroom. She even talked to a 2nd grade teacher to make sure the woman knew how to work with Xavier. My friend went above and beyond for this child. Partway through the next school year, the higher-ups come to talk to Kay again. Even though nothing was done about her complaint the previous year, a record had been made of it. As it turns out, another teacher had reported vice principal for doing the exact same thing to her as he had done to Kay. And if she had anything related to her own ordeal, they wanted to see it, and oh boy did she. She gave them every single digital receipt that she'd accumulated for the better part of a school year to compare with vice principals, establishing a pattern of him undermining teachers via erasing students' patterns of behavior. Because of that, the vice principal was quickly removed from his position as vice principal, even though he wasn't technically fired. He was just moved to a different school and he was put in a much lesser position, and he was paid significantly less than before. What a revenge that was. And I can only imagine the smile that came across OP's face when they heard, "Do you have any evidence of this behavior?" And then proceeded to bring out an entire filing cabinet labeled BS the vice principal did. And guys, just combing through the comments, this stuff happens a lot apparently, and my mind is blown. This person says, "Teacher here. The The administration in my district is famous for erasing student referrals. They do it because not only do referrals negatively reflect the school's data, but so do the potential outcomes of referrals, like suspensions, etc. It's a constant battle between holding the students accountable for their behavior and butting heads with leaders who want positive school data, even if it doesn't reflect the truth. The stressors of a teacher's job go well beyond the students. Everything is a game of politics now. And this person comments, as a teacher myself, this story sadly doesn't surprise me, and it's more common than you'd think. I'm so glad the vice principal was taken out of that position because that is so not okay. You can't just delete records of student behavior. Those records do not exist for teachers to punish students and then have a laugh about them. They are so necessary in the long-term goal of helping students, not to punish them. I've had several students' doctors request this information in order to help diagnose learning disabilities, emotional and social disorders, etc. And they can also be used as legal court documents in custody or abuse cases. The list goes on and on. So deleting these records for selfish purposes, you shouldn't be allowed to be in that position, and you certainly don't understand the laws pertaining to student records, and are clearly not interested in actually helping students. He should have been fired, straight up. So I had a really rough time in high school. Long story short, I was suffering from severe depression and chronic anxiety, and my grades were suffering badly. On the starting of my junior year, my mom decided that it might be a good idea to enroll me in a school that catered to kids that suffer from mental illness. The school was also attached to the Young Mothers program, helping teenage girls that were pregnant prepare for having their babies while also trying to help them graduate. The school was also extremely small. It was one hallway across and maybe 8 rooms total. Its student population was maybe 150 students at max, but you'd be lucky to see 30 on any given day. There was only one teacher for each subject except math, which had 2. One that taught sophomores and below, and the other that taught juniors and seniors. The latter being who this tale is about. Now that I've set the scene, let's get into the meat of the story. Now I could complain about this school all day. How it was woefully underfunded, how cramped and depressing it was, etc. But the teachers were amazing. All were very understanding of each student's individual needs and always willing to work extra hard to help students who were struggling. They did their best, even with the limited budget, to make classes engaging. All but one, my math teacher, who we'll call Mac. Now you could tell right from the start that Mac felt a little too comfortable in his position at the school. Within a week of school start, he had gone from lazily and poorly teaching his lessons to giving up entirely and just pulling up episodes of TV shows during class time. He would also occasionally walk out for 20 minutes at a time to go talk to his best buddy across the hall, who I'll call Miss Principal. The two of them were nearly inseparable, to the point where if you were trying to look for Mac, you'd be more than likely to find him in the principal's office than his own office. If you ever stumbled across the pair of them, they were always laughing about some inside joke, clearly not taking their jobs too seriously. And here's where things go from maybe mildly annoying to absolutely infuriating, because Mac was also a massive bully. He would constantly make fun of his own students behind their back, criticizing the Young Mother students for their poor choices and saying things like, maybe if they weren't such idiots, they wouldn't have gotten themselves into this mess. And they should have just been smart enough to realize the consequences. Now they'll stay broke and dependent on their parents for the rest of their lives. Pathetic. On top of that, he would call students in the program I was in crazies. And he would say things like, I'm not a babysitter, that's what psych wards are for. And I want to note that most of the students in this program were like me. Some had slight learning disabilities, but nothing so severe as what he was making it out to be. Worst of all, he would have nicknames for the slow-learning students, Downsy being the one he used most. Now, this revenge plot starts about 2 months before the end of the year. Up until then, I'd managed to remain pretty quiet on the topic to my parents. mainly just bitching about it to my friends. But one day, he said something that just made me snap. I had enough, and I went home seething that night. And at dinner, I went on and on about how terrible of a teacher he was, and how incompetent, childish, and cruel he was. After I had calmed down, my mom asked me what his name was, and I told her. And in that very moment, I saw a look of recognition immediately turn into intense rage, as my mom says, I've been trying to get him fired for years. Unfortunately, her position on the school board didn't allow her to hire or fire teachers. But that night, she told me to write out a statement on all the things he had done. And that's when I had an idea. I told my mom that I would do one better, and the next day, I went to school with an empty notebook and a mountain of pens. Over the course of the next week or so, I went up to every single student I could and explained what I was doing, and basically begged them to write down anything they could think of that showed that he was a terrible teacher. I wanted to nail him to the cross with bureaucracy. I wanted to ensure that he would never teach in any school district, any state, or any country ever again. I managed to get about 30 statements from the students and even a couple from the teachers. And then came time for my statement. I wrote out a 3-page account on all the terrible things that I'd seen him say and do, and how harmful I thought it was to not only the students learning there, but also to the reputation of the school district. And it was a masterpiece. I then handed them all over to my mom and waited. Some time went by, and as I waited, I relished in every cruel comment he made, every episode of the X-Files we watched, every extra long bathroom break he took, and I wasn't the only one. It was like the whole school was waiting with bated breath, and the day finally came. One day, we had a substitute teacher, and I was elated until the very last day of school. On one of the last days, I end up asking one of the teachers, who I loved, what happened to him. She told me she can't get into specifics, but he was let go after an investigation was done, and she thinks he'll never teach ever again. I sure hope so, and I just want to say I think we can agree that people like him have a special place in hell, and that OP was a freaking hero in this one, because they helped so many others by getting rid of this guy. Also, I believe the principal should have been fired as well, because there's no way she wasn't in on it being buddy-buddy with that teacher. Let me know your thoughts though, and guys, if you thought that teacher was bad, listen to this post. So this happened in high school when I was about 15 years old. This year would be the first year where we would take chemistry classes, and I was absolutely stoked, as I loved biology and science, so I figured I would love chemistry as well. The whole class was excited for the first chemistry lesson ever, as we'd heard from older students that chemistry was a fun class with a ton of fun experiments, and at first sight, the teacher seemed like an awesome guy. But oh boy, were we wrong. And I want to note that this was the first year the teacher was working at our school. Now, my class had a few class clowns in them who would make the occasional jokes, and to teach them a lesson along with us for laughing, he would often force the whole class to stay behind after the bell rang, making us late for other classes. Now that wasn't the worst thing. The worst thing about this teacher was that once he got slightly pissed off, which was extremely easy, he would just stop teaching the class. He would just sit behind his desk and play games on his phone, and I kid you not. Occasionally, if he was feeling generous, he would put on a YouTube video that would do the teaching for him. Also, whenever we did experiments, I would ask an explanation on why something gave a certain chemical reaction, and he would just laugh at me and tell me that I should have paid attention during his explanation, an explanation that hadn't even taken place. Also, the guy would put stuff in his test that wasn't even in the book, saying that we should be able to understand these things by using common sense. Now, as you can imagine, everyone's grades were absolutely miserable. They were in fact so bad that I and a crap ton of others weren't even passing the year. That's when I decided to take action, and I asked my classmates to ask their parents to start sending emails to this teacher. hoping that this would wake him up. But it didn't. In fact, this guy didn't respond to any of the emails that were sent to him. I was getting more and more frustrated with this teacher. I'm not someone who likes to confront people, but with the end of the school year coming closer and closer, I decided that I had to take some kind of action. So I decided to confront him. And scared as I was, I went to this teacher after school to ask him why he was doing all of this, and why he didn't respond to any of the emails, etc. He as always just laughed, and he sends me away with a ton of sarcastic remarks. And that got my blood boiling. I was so done with this guy. And here's the ProRevenge. I collected all of the emails that were sent to him from both parents and students, and I even recorded a few of his classes on my phone. Although I wasn't actually allowed to do this, I didn't give a crap about the rules anymore at this point. I just wanted to collect as much evidence as I could. These videos, of course, showed how much of a lousy teacher this guy was. And the best thing that happened was when I decided to record another confrontation with him, where he would actually say some nasty things to me. He called me a lousy bitch, and he said my mom didn't do a good job raising me. Of course, I was extremely angry after, but at the same time, I was so happy when I knew I caught that all on tape. When students heard what I was doing, they were absolutely stoked, and they provided me with much more evidence, like videos of the guy going crazy in class, yelling at students, playing games on his phone, etc. In the end, I made an incredibly long Google document with all the videos and pictures included, with all evidence and statements on why this teacher was absolutely useless and begging for an exemption in his class. 2 days later, I was taken out of English class by the principal, who heard what I was doing. He then took me to his office and asked me for some more explanation on the matter. I explained everything to him and told him that I knew my whole class would tell him the exact same story. I also asked him how come the school hadn't taken action, seeing as literally everyone had a D or lower in chemistry class. He apologized, and he said this was in fact a horrible mistake. After this talk with him, he went straight to the horrible teacher's class, and he took him into his office. I don't know exactly what happened inside that office, but I can tell you that it was a lot messier when I and a classmate came back there after 30 minutes. In the end, the horrible teacher was fired, and everyone got an exemption in chemistry. So this took place in the 90s when I was in high school, 10th grade, so I'm about 16 years old. I had recently made friends with a guy named Mario from a class project we were given. Also, I grew up in the inner city during the 90s, where teachers and admins don't really care about us other than making sure we're not stabbing or shooting each other. Since me and Mario came from a low income and welfare background, we really didn't have nice things. I did my share of shame, but I never stole from anybody. One day, we have a big school assembly for a speaker who survived a motorcycle accident. It was fun to get out of class for 2 periods. So at the end of the assembly, I was leaving, and Mario calls out to me, and he asked me to grab his jacket as he left it on the chair. Me, without thinking, just grab it and gave it to him. Cue a couple of weeks later, and I had to go to the counselor to get some records for my PSAT. The vice principal at the time was there in her office, next to my counselor, and she stopped me and she asked about a stolen jacket. Now, I was scared out of my mind because I didn't steal anyone's jacket, and she told me I was facing expulsion for stealing from another student. At this time, I was on track for some academic scholarship, and I was scared out of my mind about this. She then brought me to the room where they kept troubled kids, and I was pointed out by another student who said I stole his jacket. And that's when it dawned on me. Mario had me pass that jacket to him. Of course, I tried to explain the situation, that my friend said it was his, so I grabbed it and gave it to him. I didn't know it was another student's. I gave Mario's name to sort out the situation, and he came clean and told the vice principal I didn't know. However, this vice principal didn't like me because of the fact that I was dark-skinned. So what did she do? She told me to bring my mom in the next day, and a punishment was to be handed out. Not only did I get an ass beating when I got home, But now, I needed to bring my mom to school, who didn't even understand the situation. Without any way to defend myself, the vice principal suspended me for a week, and she put it on my record. I cried as I was so upset, because my chances of winning the scholarship after this was slim, not with having a suspension on my record. Long story short, I took the week off, and I came back ready to fight towards winning the scholarship. Senior year, I win the scholarship anyway, and I got a 4-year ride for college, and I put the experience behind me, or so I thought. 2 weeks before graduation, I was asked to sit on a selection committee for the vacated principal post. I was selected because of my studies and also my personal background. Google Cambodia and you can imagine what my parents went through. There was a CV packet of a name. It was the name of the vice principal from a couple of years back who gave me no leniency. I read her cover letter and she wrote about caring about the students, how choices we make in admin roles have a profound effect on children, all that garbage. Oh, and she wrote she knew the school very well and the students there. And I just thought, game on. When she did come in, she didn't recognize who I was. So I played it coy and I let her speak. And then it was time for us to ask questions. And guess what I asked? I asked her if a student got into something and then said my situation, would you punish the student to the max? And if she ever faced something like this before. The woman actually said that she would fully investigate. And if the student was unaware was a good student, there would be no need to be that extreme. Also, she noted that luckily, she never had to face a situation like that. I then asked, does she recognize me? She genuinely didn't, so I told the group what happened to me and how she dealt with it, and then gave them copies of the report she signed. Hearing that, her face dropped, and I don't recall what else happened, but the questioning continued until she was dismissed. In our deliberation, they were vouching for her, but I was adamant in my no vote, and we end up giving the post to acting principal. I don't know what happened to her since, but Mario, the last I heard, went back to Puerto Rico, and I went to college, and I got my degree as a civil engineer. You know what, aside from the vice principal losing out on the position she was going for because of OP, I think the best revenge here is OP succeeding when she literally tried to destroy OP's chances of going to college. I'm just so glad to note that despite all of that, that drove OP to shoot for success and is now doing well for themselves. And this person comments, beware of the toes you step on today, as they may be attached to the butt you have to kiss tomorrow. Ain't that the truth? So this isn't my story, but this revenge belongs to my friend, who we'll call Alan because that's not his name. Now, Alan is a very laid-back, very large guy who seems very gentle. But in high school, he had a seething anger issue, especially with bullies. And this story was the culmination of those. Alan had a math teacher who we'll call Barry. And Barry liked to bully his students in ways that were scary but not actually violent. And being a math teacher, he was more predictable than creative. Barry owned his classroom, and he kept discipline by humiliating anyone who challenged him. He liked to stride along the aisles between the students' desks, and he insisted on free space to stride in. When a student left belongings in the aisle, Barry would call the class's attention and then wind up big and kick their belongings to the other end of the aisle and beyond, leaving the embarrassed student to clean up the chaos while everyone waited for the class to resume. Barry would then smirk and he would say, "Let's not see things in the aisle again." Not that there was anywhere else to put things. One day in November, Barry kicks a young lady's entire gym bag across the classroom, and her gym clothes just scattered like the wind. She was mortified, and Barry just smirked, but Alan seethed. It happened to Alan before, which was no big deal, but he was unwilling to let it go when it came to embarrassing the young lady. Alan began plotting his eventual revenge. In art class, Alan had been assigned a winter sculpture project that could use any found material. He had decided to use nuts and bolts for December, but he listened carefully and he knew that there would be a similar higher marked project in the spring, and he bided his time. Being a big guy, Alan decided that his spring project would use bricks. Come January, he okayed the choice of materials with the art teacher. He then sketched out his sculpture and showed where he obtained the material and how and where the bricks would be used, and what the final product would look like. All this material was to be brought into art class and left there in the storage over the course of the term while it was being worked with. That was okayed with the art teacher too. All of this took 4 more weeks, but that was fine. So in February, Alan brings a dozen bricks to school. Perhaps coincidentally, on the day that art class immediately follows math class. And of course, what could be more convenient to carry them all in but a gym bag? There was no way for Alan to leave it in his locker between classes, since the bag was massive. So he absolutely had to bring the bag to math class. And somehow, that gym bag was left carelessly projecting a foot or so into the aisle between the desks. Math teacher Barry saw the bag, strode up the aisle, grinned, took a huge wind-up, and, well, long story short, he ends up with a broken toe. Of course, Alan expected a serious investigation afterward, but he had plotted everything with so much legitimacy, so much plausible deniability, that no one could ever show deliberate intent. Barry came back a week after, and he wasn't kicking any bags ever again. Serves him right. And honestly, I wish he ended up with more than just some broken bones, like getting canned or something. Like, it always surprises me how teachers like Barry can get away with this for so long. Like, out of a class of who knows how many students, nobody spoke up when the teacher did something like that. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I would be yelling and marching right down to the principal's office and raising absolute hell. Like, if you have the audacity to boot my bag, you are getting the boot. Guys, let me know what you would do. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /ProRevenge. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/entitled People episode, where psycho bosses are getting taught lessons they won't forget. Guys, go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.